people interested in the Khabouris manuscript, there are if you click on Khabouris manuscript, you can go to the Enlightenment. You can see the history of the Khabouris. There's pictures. There's every page of the Khabouris and an introduction to it. There's all kinds of information there about that manuscript, and it was found on the Khabur River, and that's what the translation has been. What has been done out of the Khabouris, and that's the text that we use. So Michael has now joined us, so I'll welcome Michael.
Thank you, dear heart. And I just caught the tail end. I had trouble dialing in today, so I just caught the tail end of the discussion about the Khabouris. There's some questions about it. You've gone silent, Jeannie. You must have pushed your mute button.
Well, I'm sitting here talking with my mute button on. So, no, there wasn't a question about it. I was just filling in time until you got on the switchboard and pointing out things that are on our website that a lot of people maybe don't click, and what they can find and information that's out there for free. And so I was just pointing that out. So there's nobody but me in the chat room, and there's no questions, no hands up on the switchboard.
Well, let's talk about the Khabouris a little bit. And there's a gentleman named Dan McDougall. Everybody called him Mr. Mac. And he was an attorney in Atlanta and became interested. Actually, he was doing some work with a spy agency in England. And the British intelligence suggested it was a thing. As an attorney, for him, it was there was a deep interest in how people can lie and really appear to believe their lies are true, and then do behaviors that go flat in the face of everything they're committed to and everything that they say, but doing the exact opposite, much as we're seeing, a whole lot of that happening in the political process today. So that's what got Dan interested in. British intelligence said, well, if you're going to resolve this problem, here's the place to test it. And if you can resolve it here, then you'll resolve it in the world. And so he started to work with the first century Aramaic language in resolving conflict with truth with prisoners, and that was Dan's interest. And they were working actually initially with a 7th century text based in the Aramaic language, and that text was incomplete. It was called the Yonan Codex. You might see some reference to that, and in fact there's some conflicting information around where one person in particular, who's a fairly well-known Aramicist, was really knocking the Khabouris, but then he found out, and I actually ended up presenting him the Khabouris. He's like, oh, this isn't the manuscript I was talking about. He had confused the Yonan with the Khabouris. So Dan funded an expedition to go to the Middle East and find an earlier complete text, because the 7th century text, of course, had gone through several centuries, and it was not complete. So he found a complete Eastern canon of the New Testament in a monastery on the Khabur River in Turkey. If you go to whyagain.org, our website, Ginny was talking about that, you can click on the Khabouris manuscript and you'll see pictures of it. There are actually pictures of every page in the manuscript. It's beautiful. And there's some pictures of when I brought it to Heartland as I was traveling and working with getting high resolution images made of the manuscript so that we could preserve it and do a deeper level of work in it. So Dan worked with that, and Dan and I met and discovered our mutual interest in the Aramaic language, in particular, the Aramaic teachings of Yeshua. And we discovered that we had been traveling parallel roads. I had developed a thing called Lessons in Living. Actually, it's still being taught down in a school where I started it, 35 years ago in South Florida, in Delray Beach at the Unity Center there. And Dan was teaching a thing called Emotional Maturity Instruction, which he had developed for the prisons. Our mutual interest, we discovered that we had been traveling similar paths, but similar but different paths working with the Aramaic, and mine was more oriented, being a naturopath, with the health direction, and his was more oriented to the justice system. And we married our work, and the result of that, we put the work together and developed a course called Laws of Living. And of course, that's what we're teaching in February, and that's based on, in particular, the work of 25 translators. 25 of the world's top Aramicists worked on the Khabouris manuscript, actually back in the 70s, until the project ran out of money. The manuscript itself was put on the shelf at that point, and when I became involved, that's when we took it down off the shelf. We're looking to get high-resolution images made so that the text could be preserved. And if you're interested in a deeper look at the Aramaic, then you might want to think about the Laws of Living Intensive that we'll be doing. It will be here in Southwest Virginia, Eastern Tennessee area, about 15, 20 minutes from Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia. It's a split city. Actually, if you drive down, if somebody drives down the main street of the town of Bristol, the center line on the road is the state line. And so if they weave, they're drunk and they weave, they can get tickets in 2 states. So we're on the Virginia side, and then about 15 minutes up the road, there's a really beautiful retreat center called Jubilee House, and we'll be doing a 16-day residential intensive, Laws of Living, at Jubilee House. And it's done in a whole, if you've done some of the other intensives, it's done in a whole different way from our normal intensive work. We do it in the Socratic method of questions. There's a text, about 250 pages that we go through their essays. There are several different tools that we introduce. And we're looking to understand, and many people have this understanding of law as the rule of a superior. Kings want you to believe that when a king says go, his word is law. You've maybe even heard that from one of your parents. My word is law in this house, as the law with the rule of a superior. And most of the so-called justice system works on that premise, but it's a totally false premise. That's not what law means at all in the original first century Aramaic. And our Laws of Living course is not about, well, here's a set of rules that some creator somewhere says you better obey or you're in trouble. You'll be punished or chastised or what have you, rejected, excommunicated, well, whatever. But rather, the word law represents an understanding of the energy system in which we live, move, and have our being, our relationship with those energy forces, and how they work. An example of that would be the law of gravity. The law of gravity operates whether you like it or not. It's independent of any rule maker. It's just the way the gravity system works. If you fly an airplane, you don't violate the law of gravity. Well, of course, you have to violate the law of gravity, Michael, to take a machine that's heavier than air and make it fly. Well, no, actually you don't. You create forces called propulsion that are stronger than the forces created by the law of gravity, and your airplane flies. If you violate the way it works for 1 second in that airplane crashes. If you violate the way the energy field works in relationship to health for 1 second, then health begins to crash. If you violate the way the energy field works in regard to nutrition, and we go into nutrition deeply in this course, then the energy field begins to crash. If you violate the way that sexuality works, then your sexuality, your life will begin to in each area there are laws, and it's not about obeying some superior. It's about here's how the eternal energy forces work, and you come into conscious relationship with them, just like the engineer comes into conscious relationship with gravity. You get to fly airplanes. You get to go to space. How cool is that? But only because you understood how those eternal forces operated, and you lived in harmony with those eternal forces, knowing that to violate them for 1 second was destruction. And it's the same, and the destruction isn't about being punished. It's just about here's how the energy field works. And sadly, when the Aramaic language, it's interesting, that language in which the Khabouris is written is the root language of 6 at least 6 of the world's major religions. And there's a reason for that, and it's got nothing to do with religion. It is a language that has a comprehension of how these eternal forces operate and how to come into relationship with and understand that. But the misinterpretation and the mistranslation of those words, and we go back and we listen to Vladimir Lenin, he says if you change the meaning of a culture's words, you can destroy that culture. Why would that be? Because culture is transferred among humans by and large via words. If you have different meanings in your brain cells for a particular set of words, then the words that describe accurately how these eternal forces operate, then you can never come into relationship with those eternal forces using the meanings of those words. And virtually every major key word that's important to life has been changed by the Greeks. For instance, law. It's been made into the rule of a superior. Nothing to do with it. And, when I introduce people first to the Aramaic, and it's been a while since I've shared this story on the show, so I'll share it at this moment. I tell a story about, imagine that, we're doing a week of workshops at a particular location, and we hear from a fellow in Russia who wants to come and join us for the workshops. And let's imagine you are the best translator of Russian into English and English into Russian in the world. You are the best. And I know that you're coming to the workshops and that you live locally and you're going to be attending the workshops. And I know you have an extra room in your house. So I communicate to you. We heard from this fellow in Russia. He only speaks Russian and he wants to come to the workshops. Would you house him and, transport him and translate for him? And you say, I'd be delighted to. And over the period of the week, you and I get together and he get together, the group that's attending the workshop. We have dinner, maybe have lunch once or twice, and it's just great. We do the Mind Shifters and Stillpoint Breathing on Saturday. We have an awesome result. He just gets this huge opening and is so delighted with it. And as you're getting ready to take him back to the airport, I want to communicate to this man how deeply I regard him. And I ask him if you would please tell him that I think that he's really cool. And you say, sure, I'll tell him. And you turn to him in your best Russian and you say to him, Michael thinks you've got a low body temperature. You translated my words perfectly. You didn't say anything about what I meant, but you translated my words perfectly. Oh, yes, some of those Greek translators were some of the finest in the world, but they didn't have a clue the meaning of the idioms in the Aramaic that are key to understanding the culture that lives in harmony with these laws. That is, lives in harmony with the way this energy system works, mentally, physically, emotionally, sexually, relationship, financial, every arena. There are laws for how the system works. Violate the laws, you're in trouble. There's difficulty. Not because the superior said, look at this, you broke my rules. No. So we distinguish all of that and help people to build the brain cells and engage in exercises for moving the brainwashed part of the mind out of the way, that is forgiveness. First century Aramaic forgiveness has to do with undoing the information within us that is of a destructive nature that allows us to misinterpret and misunderstand. What would the guy who hears, I think he's got a low body temperature, think when you tell him that? What would he think of me? Does he think I'm, who do I think I am? How do I dare tell him he's got, what might go on in his mind? And so we have this misinterpretation that is universal of so many key words. And so Laws of Living is about straightening out those definitions and providing tools for cleaning up the mind and getting back into harmony with living as truly as a human being. If you go back to Yeshua, you'll notice, most of the churches have this really important dogma, and I think we're at about 32,000 sects of Christianity, each with a different dogma. Here's what I believe it meant. This is the dogma in order to be part of our church that you have to believe. And by the way, if you don't believe this eternal punisher It's going to send you to a hot, fiery place for life. Dogma, doctrine. You'll notice that Yeshua had a different purpose. What did Yeshua say? He said, I come to bring you life, and life more abundantly. His purpose was not to teach you some kind of religious doctrine or dogma. His purpose was to bring you an understanding through words and tools how to live as a human being. And what is a human being? And this is our whole purpose of Laws of Living. It's the purpose of everything we do. Pardon me. What is a human being? Well, that definition has been so distorted that it includes all kinds of crazy things, but I would offer that most of what the world believes about human beings, when people are frail and faulty and do something terrible, they say, well, after all, I'm only human. Well, that's all falsehood. That's all based in the same kind of misunderstanding of you've got a low body temperature. Hold a newborn child and you get to experience what human life is. When you hold that newborn child, notice that the newborn is not loving you. This is another word that's been mistranslated. We're told, oh, you're supposed to love your neighbor. Yeshua never said that. Hold a newborn. Is the newborn loving you, or is the newborn love? No question about it. The newborn is love. Yeshua said, I come to bring you that life and life more abundantly. You'll notice the repeated references to love, and the Greeks translated into, and how many crazy different things do we have about love in this culture? Love is sexual athletics. Love is put your head on the chopping block so I can cut it off and abuse you, and you can say, oh, look, I sacrificed for you. All kinds of insane definitions of love. When the truth is, love is the essence of human life. It is a state of being. It is what we are. And Yeshua, we could restate his words about the purpose of his life and his work. And he says, I come to bring you the experience of living as love and bring that experience more abundantly. In other words, fill in every gap in every moment of your life. And that's how human life works. When they, you hear them, the disciples saying, well, you're telling us all this stuff. What's most important in all this stuff you're teaching us? What's number one? Did he say love your neighbor? No. The Greeks tell us he said love your neighbor. And the Greeks went off in a direction. And now, in the name of loving our neighbors, what do we have? Religious wars, left, right, center, up, down, rejection, murder, mayhem. What he said was not love your neighbor, love the Creator as yourself. In Aramaic, first century language, properly translated, he said maintain rachma, which is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain. The Greeks mistranslated that as love, the same way as our translator who told our Russian friend he has a low body temperature, as he translated my words, I think you're really cool, meaning I think you're the cat's meow, you're awesome, you're wonderful. But now it's become a low body temperature kind of thing. It's just totally distorted. And so what Yeshua said is maintain this condition of rachma, which in Aramaic is a gateway in the frontal lobes of the brain that is the entryway for human life into human form and keeps the human mind on track with its true nature, which is love. If hostility or fear rears its head and you do behaviors based in hostility or fear, you have violated the laws for living a human life. Now, that doesn't mean that some superior is peeved at you because you didn't do what you were told to do. It just means that you've stepped out of harmony with that which causes a human life to go forward and be maintained. And if you do that, you can't have life more abundantly. So Grady made the point. I think it was Grady made the point on yesterday's show about just how this work is so imminent. It's here. It's not about some afterlife. It's not about some esoteric something. It's the truth of how we live today in relationship with each other as human beings, and stop the lie that when we're in hostility and fear and puking on somebody else, when we're being pissy with somebody else, that it's their fault and they deserved it. And stop the conversations about them and start having a conversation about yourself and clean up your own mind, because if you don't, you throw away through hostility and fear your own human life, and your own human physiology will start to fall apart. And the result of that is death. What was that statement? The wages of sin is death. Now, what did the Greeks translate that one as? Oh, if you do something that this superior doesn't like, then you are going to die. The Creator's going to get you. As opposed to the imminent understanding, the understanding that makes it imminent in life, that if I engage in energies that are off the mark, the word sin in Aramaic is an archery term, and it simply means you missed the bullseye. So if I engage in energy that's off the mark, the result is, if I continue to do that, I will die, because I put disintegrative energies into my tissue structure each time I quote unquote sin, each time I engage in hate and fear and rage and guilt and grief and gossip and slander and vengeance and abuse of my neighbor or myself or my spouse or my children or my parents. Instead of maintaining Rahma and understanding the imminent domain of the law. When I keep this gateway open, I stay in touch with, I live in relationship with the truth of who I am. I live as love, as I am. And when hostility or fear comes up in me, I recognize that it's a generational pattern that tends to run my life. In fact, it's mostly a power person dynamic that runs my life. Then I apply forgiveness, nothing to blame somebody else off the hook for what they did, or because I'm in violation of the energy that I live, move, and have my being in. But as I remove the energy that violates, then healing occurs, and a whole different game starts to happen. And so that's what we're here to understand in the Khabouris, or from the Khabouris and from the first century teachings of the man named Yeshua. So I hope that gives you a picture of a little bit about the manuscript and what the core of it's about. And our objective, of course, with this work is to enter into the practice of functioning as the conscious, active presence of love 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and to be able to hold that space for each other whenever any of us has fallen out of harmony. And of course, you go back and, the Greeks will beat you up over this one and say, well, we've all fallen short. Yeah, we've all fallen out of harmony with how the energy system works. Does that mean somebody deserves to be condemned? No, but rather that we're in the space of holding to active love to assist in the support and the repair of whatever's going on in the energy system that might be off base. And so, the whole objective of an intensive, we've had, several people from last summer's intensives calling into the show on occasion, and the support that's there and developing for each other as those layers that perhaps, haven't been looked at in 100 generations in any of our bloodlines. As each individual says, okay, wow, I start to look back. Jeannie and I went to the movies last night and saw the film Judy. My brain's gone on her name.
Garland.
Judy Garland. Judy Garland. Awesome film. Both of us ended up in tears toward the end of it to watch how this young girl from Michigan somewhere was discovered, and how the movie studios executives basically manipulated her into becoming a child star. She starred in, true story, she starred in The Wizard of Oz as Dorothy, And, they forced her to become, as a young child, drug dependent because they were afraid she'd put on weight partway through the film, and she couldn't do that. So, there's one scene where she's sitting with Mickey Rooney there. She's got a crush on Mickey Rooney, and he's eating a hamburger. They're in a restaurant, and she has a matron who kind of looks over her, takes care of her for the studio, and she wants a bite of his hamburger, and the matron comes over and says, "No, you can't get fat while you're doing this movie," and hands her an amphetamine pill. This is your lunch. And hooks her on pills, and the rest of her life is drug addiction and the challenges she goes through. And at the age of 47 was dead of an overdose. Abuse that started in early childhood, the lack of rock, the lack of love, and the pursuit of money. How bizarre. It's very touching, and it very distinctly shows how when she went through, I think, 5 different marriages, and each time she was married, the power person shows how the studio executive just degrades her and drags her through the dirt to force her to do his bidding in this movie. And power person dynamic, you see it being instilled in her mind. Here's somebody who's got more control over her life than she does. He's always threatening her with taking away her movie, life that's going to be her future, that'll be so wonderful for her, ends up being a tragedy. And what does she do in her marriages when the stress is up? She turns to the same kind of abuse that was done to her and ended up at 47 dead from a drug overdose. Bizarre. And how do we repair a life like that? Well, you step in, and piece by piece by piece, you undo the power person dynamics. You live in a space where you're willing to be responsible for those dynamics. You're willing to be supported in healing them. You're willing to confront them, although it's not Dr. Feelgood. You're willing to step out of the defense mechanisms that the power person used, which is usually some form of attack or what have you, or degradation that's used, vicious energy towards others, especially those who are closest. You have to own those and choose to begin to forgive, to remove those energetic patterns, to step into still another place in the whole body of work. The reason for this show is to be here of support for moving through those things. And so we're here to hold the space, and appreciate each of you who's there to really, truly be the space for the process that each of us are going through as this healing unfolds. And speaking of healing, I got a call from a friend of mine last night, and he was sharing that he just had a diagnosis from his medical doctor that left him in a pretty traumatic place. His name's Steve, and I'll just ask everybody to just tap into Steve's energy, and everyone here participating in intensives such as developing intuition, so we can stand in that space of active present love and just see Steve's chest and lungs being radiated with the active presence of love, that whatever anomalies are going on in tissue, and they don't have it down to an exact diagnosis. They've given him 2 or 3 scary things that might be going on. And he's a deep friend of this work, has done this work for several decades. Used to be a participant in our workshops in Florida way back in the early days of developing this work. So Steve, we cherish you, we honor you, we hold the space for you. And especially for, if there's any kind of mental, emotional component involved with what's happening in your physiology, we hold that can be forgiven, be removed, and totally reorganize your energy system to a state of awesome, perfect, vital health. Steve's just this awesome man that's been around in my world for the last 30, almost 40 years. And so we care for him deeply, and Steve, we hold the space for your healing. And anyone else that's facing financial, relationship, emotional, physical challenges, we hold the space for healing. And it is that awesome presence of true active love that when it comes forward, enters into the space of physiology where distortions have occurred, or into emotions where distortions have occurred, or into the mind where distortions have occurred, and reorganizes that structure into health and wholeness. The whole bottom line of healing, having done this work for almost 50 years, I can think back to a point maybe, 20, 25 years ago when I started really questioning what is healing? What is it that makes the difference? What on the occasions where I've seen people who have head issues that are really, in the normal sense of the world, absolutely unresolvable. And as I started to question and ask to be shown what is it, what creates that change in energy, what became clear to me as I looked back over the previous couple of decades of doing this work is each time I saw someone making that kind of monumental shift, two things had occurred. Something that was in hiding within the mind, something that someone had been in denial of. And remember, our definition of denial is when I think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of something inside of me. So the bottom line of healing is that when one can step out of denial and allow, if there's pain in your structure, you're in denial. That's just the way it is. And so are you willing to step into a space of opening that part of your mind? And it might mean facing some pretty deep power person dynamics. Are you willing to open that and to let that energy come forward in the presence of love? And you can't do that without the willingness to look at what's there. Oftentimes people will feel attacked if they're shown where their deficiency or their weakness is, when in fact the idea is to just look at the truth and to be able to see truly what's going on and have access to that deeper hidden part of the mind. There's no idea of attack and saying, gee, did you notice that you did thus and so? Now, the average person, when you show them where the blockage of truth is, they'll go into attack mode and puke on you for how dare you say such a thing. That's not what it's about. It's about you have to be able to look at what your energy field is doing and see the truth of it in order to bring correction. So what became very clear to me is that when someone was able to bring something out of hiding in their minds, which is their body literally, and bring that energy forward in the presence of active love, and I mean that love has to be conscious, active, and present. Human life has to be in conscious awareness and operating in that space. And when that love is present, and we willingly step into looking at the dis-ease energy, instead of feeling attacked when we're shown where our blockage is, to go, oh, is it possible that I'm blocking in that? Well, gee, 87 different times with 42 different people, I've been all pissy and moany with other people and blaming them when that happens. So maybe I need to look at that. And when I look at that and I let the raw core energy come to the surface in the presence of love, then healing occurs. And there is no tool that I know of on planet Earth besides first century Aramaic forgiveness that empowers people to consistently, persistently do that. Yes, there are accidental ways that people stumble across it and they get a piece of healing, and not understanding the principle involved, they often go off in some direction that doesn't have anything to do with the truth. But the bottom line truth of it is, if there's a hidden or dissociated part of the mind that I'm willing to receive feedback about and willing to allow it to come forward in the presence of active love, then healing occurs. And it doesn't matter where the energy is in tissue. If it's anywhere in your tissue structure and there's a disease going on, that disease can heal absolutely instantly on the spot. I've seen it happen over and over and over and over again. Yes, right up to and including cancers. But the unwillingness to love truth and let the truth come forward and look at it locks the disintegrative energy wherever it is in tissue, and that's the part of your structure that will keep nagging you in pain because there's an energy there that doesn't belong. Willingness allows it to come forward in the presence of love. Dissolution, forgiveness is the dissolution of that energy. And so that's what we're here to support. That's what we're here to understand. That's a basic bottom line of healing from the first century Aramaic language. And you go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and this man was a physicist. This man was a psychologist. This man was not a theologian. He was a geneticist. He understood how the energy system worked. When they said the wages of sin is death, there was no threat in that whatsoever. It's just, here's how it works. You put an energy in that doesn't belong, and the tissue that it's in begins to fall apart. You get enough of that happening, and you die. Forgiveness is to drop into that part of your own mind and remove the part that holds that hostility or fear, rage, guilt, grief, whatever it happens to be. And so that's the bottom line of healing, and that's what we're here to support. And we're delighted that you're here to be part of the process. And of course, the idea of the show is to be here as a space to open questions and to empower people by tapping into that first century Aramaic information and understanding. And, not many people are going to spend, for me, the Aramaic specifically, I started working with that about 40 years ago. I was engaged in this work for approximately 10 years before that. But when I came into contact with the Aramaic, that was like the next huge opening and the next step. And so I basically spent 40 years full time understanding the healing aspect, not the philosophical, not the theological, but the healing aspect of that first century teaching of this man named Yeshua. And we're here to support you. You're probably not going to spend 40 years of your life full time putting that all together. And so we're here to offer the best answers that we've got and support the process. And in this work, we define processing as the ability to keep love conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up, to allow that which is less than love to come forward, and to stop the focus on everybody else as the problem in your life and start to own that here I am. I'm the one's in pain. I have a thought disorder, and when I bring that thought disorder, when I stop, defending, and I bring that thought disorder forward in the presence of active love, it dissolves, and I am healed. It's just the way it goes. That's the healing core and the healing power of this man that was called the Great Physician. So this work, as opposed to being about treatment, and treatment can be wonderful. No question about it. There have been some wonderful treatments that have been discovered for symptoms. But in the last analysis, treatment isn't healing. I think any medical professional that offers treatment without offering healing at the same time, without having educated themselves as healers and offering support for healing to people, I think that's criminal. To hold oneself out as a healer, as one who heals others, and offers treatment only, but no deeper insight into the dynamics of what are going on within the structure of the individual and cleaning that up. I think it's just really, it's a sham, and it has created so much suffering in our world today. And it's time to put an end to suffering. If you're acquainted with Yeshua and what he taught, and you actually engage in what he taught, not believe in what he taught, but engage it, your suffering's over. And or you'll come in touch with layers of suffering that you need to clean up. And as you clean it up, as you do your work, those layers of suffering just disappear and dissipate. That's the whole bottom line. And what's left when you do that process? Being, hold the newborn, that's what's left. Literally the awesome active presence of love. It's who we are. It's what we're designed for. And so that's what we're here to support and be part of. And if you're out there and you have any questions for us, if you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, our call-in number is 563-999-3581. 563-999-3581. If you're in the chat room and you have a question, you want to dial that number, you'll be listening to the show. And then if you push 1, a little hand will go up in the control panel, and Jean will know you want to talk to us, and we'll have a conversation. So, Jeannie, do we have anything happening in the chat room or anybody in the control room with a question for us?
There's just one other person listening in the chat room, but they're not on there where they can talk. And there's a lot of people on the switchboard, but nobody has their hand up. So we have 18 minutes. If someone presses 1, we've got plenty of time for a conversation.
So how can we support you? What's on your mind? If I had been in your hometown, if I were there today and just walked down off of a platform after saying what I just said, you know, I mean, your local university or your local church, your local library, your local prison or whatever, and I just shared what I shared, and I walked down off the platform, I've completed my presentation, I know that virtually everybody who's listening on the switchboard would walk over to me and say, well, Michael, what about? And that's what this space is for, those what about questions. Now, if you know you're listening and you go, well, my voice is a little shaky, I don't know if I want to, well, can you make it okay for your voice to be shaky?
You've got a hand up.
And go ahead, push 1 and ask your question. Go for it. All right, let's go for it.
All right. They both hit at the same time. I think one is Tim and one is Susan, so I'm going to put them both on. 610, you're on the air.
Well, hey, young lady, I was thinking about texting you folks this morning to see how your eye is doing, Tim. So I'm glad you're here. How are you doing?
Well, a little better. Hi, Sue.
It's moving in the right direction.
The button the same time I did.
I know. That's weird. We didn't.
Great minds think alike, right?
Right.
Great minds think alike.
He's in a different room. Yeah.
Aha.
What I wanted to ask,
for it,
Michael,
Tim.
is how do we know that the Khabouris manuscript isn't translated from a Greek translation? How do we know that it was directly written by an eyewitness or somebody else, not from the Greek?
Well, the imprimatur, and it'd be kind of like, you know, you being a lawyer, a notary today would certify, how do I know that, you know, this is an actual court document? Well, there's a notary who certified it. Now, do notaries lie? Yeah, it's been known to happen, but generally speaking, if you have a notarized document, you can trust it, right? So there's an imprimatur, a page at the beginning of the manuscript that would be the equivalent of the notary's page of a bishop of the Church of Nineveh, which would have been one of the largest churches in that area in the Turkey. The manuscript was found in the Khabouris River in Turkey. So that would have been one of the largest churches around 1000 AD. And that imprimatur, which is, and we've had the manuscript carbon dated twice now, actually, at the University of Arizona, which is kind of a primo carbon dating facility. And they tell us that the manuscript is AD 1000 plus or minus 50 years. And the imprimatur says that it's a copy of a 164 AD text. So that makes it a copy of the earliest known first century manuscript of the Aramaic. So that's our verification, or at least the imprimatur. That's the notary. And then you just take it and you put it to work. Does it work? And if it works, then I think we've got pretty good verification that it's accurate.
How do we know that the one that it was copied from wasn't a translation from the Greek? How do we know that was also in Aramaic? Does the imprimatur say that?
Well, I no, the imprimatur doesn't say, and this wasn't copied in 164 AD or from a 164 AD text. It does not say that. But here's how we know: we look at the Greek translations that are so silly and off the wall and ridiculous that are not in the Khabouris manuscript. So let's say, for instance, let's go to let me get my brain to some of the mistranslations the Greek put into it. Well, let's take this one of love your neighbor. The Greeks say love your neighbor. The Khabouris manuscript doesn't say love your neighbor. It says have rachma for your neighbor. And Rock means this filter in the frontal lobes of the brain has nothing to do. So there are several places where the Greek mistranslations simply don't appear. And that would be our next step in verifying, is this a copy of a Greek text? And no, it's not.
Okay.
Yes, I know there are people out there saying, oh, yes, the Peshitta was just a copy of the Greek. But the mistakes that don't appear, for me, come to a standard. And it's interesting, Dan McDougall that I spoke about earlier was an attorney. And in doing the translation work, he directed the translation with these 25 translators. And he used the rules of evidence as developed for a courtroom to determine what gets into the translation as to whether or not it's accurate. And the mistranslations that the Greeks put in there just don't exist in the Khabouris.
Okay, that makes sense. What did you want to ask, Sue?
Oh, I like this question that you asked, Tim. That's been on my mind too, but I just didn't think it was answerable. So I appreciate your answer, Michael. Tim's sister has been a sort of an experiential Aramaic scholar for years. In fact, she went to one of your early workshops. Her name is now Rahmaneh Myers. She calls herself Rahmaneh, but she might have been Claudia.
Obviously from the Aramaic.
Yeah, right. Well, I've been talking to her about
tell her I said hello.
I will. She gets pretty hot under the collar about this whole thing. She says a great deal of precious material was suppressed because of institutional preferences and patriarchal mind stuff. And she said George Lamsa.
She's right.
And yeah, you didn't want to say it, but she just said, for me, I don't concern myself with the scholarly picking apart of this and that. What I do is just what you do, Michael. I apply it. And if it fits and helps me grow and helps me heal, this is what I'll use. And it's the Aramaic every time. And yet it's very interesting. I've had talks with my daughter, who's a traditional Episcopal priest, and she says, no, the Koine Greek was the first, because Aramaic was not a written language, but it had the same alphabet as Hebrew. So it makes me think, why then was it not written? If there was a written alphabet, it must have been written.
There was an alphabet.
Yeah.
Well, and, you can go back, even in the Greek translations, there's one particular place where the final words on the cross that Yeshua speaks, and what the Greek translators say in that passage is, and we've left this in the original Aramaic. Aramaic was a written language. There's just no question and no doubt whatsoever.
Yeah.
But, the Greek scholars in their ivory towers, and, just take a look around the country at how many Greek scholars sit in their ivory towers making their, $80, $100, $200, $500,000 a year, whatever they're doing from their scholarship. What happens to that whole system if one day they all wake up and say, something? It wasn't Greek to start with, it was Aramaic. And therefore, I know nothing, and I have to start over. And now my whole financial structure collapses. How much blockage of truth do you suppose that induces into the conversation?
Oh, of course.
So it's just,
of course.
It's like, it's silly. But, and you mentioned Lamsa and Rahmaneh's conversation about Lamsa. He worked at Unity Village at the time when he was doing his translation work. And this was a point where, the good Christian folks were literally threatening to string him up, to kill him.
Oh, my God.
And I understand that he said that in his translation, he made approximately 1,600 changes out of what he said should have been 10,000. In translating and bringing it back to accuracy from the Greek to the Aramaic. And he made those changes because the others, he was afraid they would literally kill him.
Oh, my God.
There's quite a bit of viciousness and violence in the mind of the so-called theologian that is challenged with here's what the man said in Aramaic, and then here's what the Greek translations are. Yeshua did not think in Greek. He did not speak in Greek. And, as my simple example of, you've got a low body temperature. I mean, just take something as simple as that and multiply that by 1,000 instances where the Aramaic is it's a small language. There aren't a lot of words in Aramaic. And so there are multiple meanings, and there are deeply meaningful passages that are totally and completely idiomatic. And you can be the best translator in the world, and you can't translate an idiom. You've just got to know what the idiom means.
Right.
So.
Right. Well,
and for me, the final is. Go ahead.
You go ahead. For you, the final is.
No, I was just going to agree with Rockmane that it's not about belief. It's about if you apply it, does it work? There's the ultimate verification. If you apply the Greek, love your neighbor. Well, look at how many people are out there slaughtering each other in the name of Christ.
I know.
I come to bring you the love of my Master Christ. If you won't accept it, I'll kill you. Excuse me, something's wrong with that translation.
I know it.
Something's off
I know it. It's
the wall.
So disturbing. Oh, yeah. Well,
Something
one
outside
thing she
of
did say.
Really?
Yeah. One thing she did say is 80% of what Christians have in our culture from the Greek is okay. And now maybe I was surprised it was so much, considering what you said about Lamsa and the thousands more corrections he would have made. She said 80%, I mean, we can limp along, and we are limping along. We're doing terribly in some departments, but she said, this is the way it's going to be. But for her, she is actually Tim's and her mother was Jewish, and so she has studied Judaism. And at her mother's funeral, she actually said the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic and or Hebrew. What was it, Tim? Was it Aramaic or Hebrew? I think it was Aramaic. Yeah. Anyway, she's one of the unity people. Just trying to find the truth in any tradition, but mainly focused on Christianity because that's how she was reared, more or less. And her parents were not practicing either way particularly. And I'm sort of going off here, but
And Aramaic predated Hebrew. Hebrew, as Arabic, is a daughter language of Aramaic.
Wow.
They're offspring languages, both Arabic and Hebrew. In fact, I can remember Dan way back, this goes back 50 years ago, Dan went into and taught a piece of the emotional maturity instruction in a synagogue in Atlanta. And the rabbi of the synagogue afterward just lavished praise on him and said, thank you for teaching us how to understand our language again.
Oh, how gorgeous.
I was introduced to a rabbi in South Florida. Actually, I've got a phone call that came in last night from the fellow who introduced me. This goes back about 15 years ago. And, he was sharing, he's a congregant of this rabbi, this gentleman who introduced us, and he shared this is just so on target with what we are working with. And he introduced us, and when I met him and said, well, our work goes back and we're working with the Aramaic. I mean, this guy's about 6'6". I was sitting at his kitchen table, and I'd never had a schnuzzle before, but this guy's about 6'6". When I said I was working with the Aramaic, he's like, well, all of our wisdom keepers in the Judaic tradition were Aramaic. And he got up from his seat and he came over and put his arms down. So let me give you a schnuzzle. He gave me this big hug, and he's like, yes, please come and speak at our synagogue.
Wow.
It's all Aramaic. It isn't Greek.
Wow, that's so exciting. That's so exciting. Well,
it's powerful.
it's been very fun to talk to her because she has been pushing our reading and informing ourselves about Aramaic for years and years and years, and kept running up against stone walls, particularly with Tim's, after Tim's father died, his mother remarried a wonderful Christian man who was very open-minded too, but he used to argue against her arguments for the Aramaic being the real thing. And he said things like, yes, the Aramaic is an interesting language. It hasn't got much vocabulary, so you could put a number of meanings on any one word, and you can make it pretty much say what you want. And so we're not going to do that. And that was, Tim, that was Bob Burge. And so that was the end of all that.
We'll go to the Greek. We'll go to the Greek where we've already established what those meanings are going to be in advance.
Right. I know. Oh, we didn't even.
Okay. Rather than saying, so clearly, with it being a small language and multiple meanings, which is true, and many idioms, which is true, rather than, well, then we're going to do an intensive scrutiny so that we can establish what those words actually meant in the first century. And that's what Dan did with 25 translators. I mean, he was paying 25 different of the world's top Aramicists, and he would send a passage out to all 25 of them, get the translations back, and if they weren't accurate, or pardon me, if they weren't consistent, he'd send it back out and say, something wrong here, and, we need to do more work on this. And then when 25 translators all agreed and said, this is it, then it still wasn't considered that the translation was accurate. The next step was, in order to verify it, and this was the part that I played in it, I don't speak, read, or write the Aramaic language. As the director of the Khabouris Foundation, I'm not allowed to. And what happened is we'd take what the translator said then and bring it into the laboratory of the classroom, like an intensive. You came to a laboratory when you guys came to that intensive this summer. And does it work? Once we had the consistency of the 25 translators and then it worked, we said, okay, now we've got something that is valid.
Wow. How far along are you?
There's not really a way. I don't have a way that I can quantify how much of the translation has been done or not been done. That's it. It's really going to take having the funding and starting the translation work up again and gathering a team that's capable of taking it to the next level to really establish that and see where it needs to go. And so, and of course, we don't know what we don't know yet from the Aramaic. Yeah. But what we do know certainly opens a space for monumental healing. And so we know we've got a significant amount of it accurately understood. And it'll be nice when we get it heading off to the next level, when we've got the funding to do that. And a really,
basically, very important part. The important part about healing is it. I mean, isn't that pretty much it? We'd love to have other stuff, but if we're applying this, we could do a heck of a lot of healing in the world.
Everything else is handled. Absolutely. Yeah. That takes care of it all. That's the core of it.
Oh, boy.
I'm in agreement, and we're down to the last few seconds. So I'm going to say thank you, Tim, for opening with that question, and Susan for continuing the conversation. Tell Rockmane I said hello. I'd love to chat with her, love to have her come on the show, and let's have a conversation. In the meantime, everybody, have the best year yet of your eternal life. It is an awesome gift to give the world.